Egypt did not survive because it was strong. It survived because it was structured. For thousands of years, Egypt was not simply a kingdom, it was a system. A system where power did not belong only to armies, or to kings, or to cities. Power belonged to order. When that order was respected, Egypt endured. When it was ignored, rulers vanished. Empires rose around the Nile and collapsed. Assyria burned cities. Persia ruled from afar. Greece conquered the known world. Rome built an empire that spanned continents. Egypt watched them all. Sometimes conquered, sometimes ruled by foreigners, but never erased. Because Egypt was not held together by conquest, it was held together by continuity, by ritual repeated for centuries, by land measured the same way generation after generation, by temples that outlived dynasties. Many tried to rule Egypt. Most failed, not because they lacked power, but because they misunderstood it. In 332 BC, a young conqueror arrived at the Nile. He had defeated the greatest empire of his age. He commanded an army that had never been stopped. But when he reached Egypt, he did something no conqueror had done before. He did not demand submission. He sought recognition. By the 4th century BC, Egypt was no longer the empire it had once been. The age of pyramid builders and warrior pharaohs belonged to a distant past. Egypt no longer ruled the eastern Mediterranean. Its armies no longer marched deep into Asia. Its borders had narrowed to the Nile Valley and its delta. Yet Egypt had not collapsed. The temple still stood. The priesthood still functioned. The Nile still flooded the fields on which everything depended.
For generations, Egypt had lived under foreign domination. Assyrian kings had invaded and withdrawn. Persian kings had taken control and ruled as imperial overlords. Under Persian rule, Egypt was officially a province, governed by satraps, taxed heavily, closely monitored. But Egypt was not destroyed. The Persians understood the value of Egyptian stability. They allowed temples to operate, they tolerated local customs, they avoided direct interference in ritual life. And yet, something was missing. In Egypt, authority was not complete without legitimacy, and legitimacy could not be imposed from a distant capital. The Persian kings ruled Egypt, but they did not become pharaohs in the deepest sense. They stood above the system, not inside it. Egypt continued to function, but it felt unfinished. Then, in 332 BC, the Persian world collapsed in the west. Alexander of Macedon defeated Persian armies in Asia Minor. He shattered imperial power along the Mediterranean coast, and Egypt suddenly found itself open. When Alexander entered Egypt, there was no resistance, no final stand, no desperate defense. Instead, something remarkable happened. Egypt accepted him. What followed was not the end of Egyptian history, it was one of its most unusual chapters. A Greek dynasty would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Egyptian gods would continue to dominate religious life, and the Nile would become the heart of a new Hellenistic world. When the Persians ruled Egypt, they did not attempt to erase it. That distinction matters. Egyptian temples were not closed, priests were not stripped of their roles, the traditional calendar of rituals continued. But the balance that defined Egyptian power was weakened.
In Egyptian thought, the universe was sustained by Ma'at, a concept that combined order, balance, justice, and truth. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler, he was the human link between the gods and the land. His role was to preserve Ma'at. Without this role, kingship was incomplete. The Persian kings ruled from distant capitals. They visited Egypt rarely, if at all. They governed through officials, not through ritual presence. As a result, their authority remained administrative. Taxes flowed, law was enforced, but sacred legitimacy was thin. This created a strange condition. Egypt was stable, yet perpetually uneasy. Local revolts broke out again and again. They were suppressed, but they never disappeared entirely. These uprisings were not always nationalist in the modern sense. They were religious, symbolic, focused on legitimacy. Egypt was not demanding independence, It was demanding order. The Persian kings never fully answered that demand. So Egypt waited, not for a savior, but for a ruler who understood what kingship meant on the Nile. Alexander did not enter Egypt as a conqueror in the traditional sense. There was no final battle on the Nile, no desperate resistance, no ruined capital. The Persian governor of Egypt chose not to fight. The garrison stood down. The cities opened their gates. To later historians, this seemed astonishing, but to Egyptians, it made sense. Egypt had lived under foreign rulers before. It had learned that resistance was not always the path to survival. What mattered was not who arrived with an army. What mattered was how they ruled once they arrived. Alexander moved carefully. He did not abolish local offices. He did not dismantle temple estates. He did not insult Egyptian religion.
Instead, he traveled to Memphis, the ancient capital, a city heavy with memory, a place where kings had been crowned for millennia. There, Alexander allowed himself to be crowned pharaoh. This was not a gesture for Greek audiences. It was a declaration meant for Egypt. The ceremonies followed ancient tradition. Priests invoked the gods. Ritual formulas were spoken that had been used since the Old Kingdom. Alexander did not resist these forms. He accepted them. He sacrificed to Egyptian gods. He participated in cultic rituals. He acknowledged the authority of the priesthood. This was not submission, it was strategy. Alexander understood that Egypt could not be ruled by force alone. It had to be ruled through recognition. By accepting the role of pharaoh, he placed himself inside Egypt's system of legitimacy. For Egyptians, this changed everything. Memphis was not chosen by accident. It was the symbolic heart of Egypt's political tradition. Long before Thebes or Alexandria, Memphis had been the seat of kingship. To be crowned there was to link oneself to the deepest layers of Egyptian memory. Alexander understood this. He did not attempt to rule Egypt as a Greek king governing foreigners. He ruled it as a pharaoh governing Egypt. In Egyptian inscriptions, his name appeared in hieroglyphs. In reliefs, he was shown performing offerings. In temples, he was depicted alongside the gods. This was not propaganda in the modern sense. It was participation. Alexander did not claim to replace Egyptian tradition. He claimed to continue it. This approach distinguished him sharply from the Persians. Where Persian kings ruled Egypt as an imperial possession, Alexander ruled it as a sacred landscape.
Where Persian authority remained distant, Alexander's authority became visible and ritualized. This difference mattered more than armies. It created acceptance without coercion, stability without repression. For the first time in generations, Egypt had a ruler who fit. Yet for Alexander, Memphis was not enough. He had been crowned, he had been accepted, but full legitimacy in Egypt required something more. So Alexander undertook a journey that puzzled his companions. He traveled west, away from cities, away from the Nile, into the desert. His destination was the oasis of Siwa. Siwa was remote, difficult to reach, cut off from the main routes of power. But it was one of the most sacred places in Egypt. At Siwa stood the oracle of Amun, a god older than dynasties, a god associated with kingship, creation, and divine authority. The oracle had a special status. It had never been conquered by the Persians. Their armies had failed to reach it. Their kings had never been recognized there. Siwa represented legitimacy untouched by empire. Alexander knew this. The journey itself was a statement. It was dangerous, unnecessary from a military perspective, and deeply symbolic. According to tradition, Alexander entered the sanctuary alone. What happened inside was not recorded in detail, but the outcome was clear. The oracle recognized him as the son of Amun. In Egyptian terms, this meant divine filiation, not metaphorical, not poetic, political. In Egypt, myth and power were inseparable. To be recognized by a god was to be recognized by the system itself. Whether the declaration was sincere belief or calculated ritual did not matter. What mattered was acceptance. After Siwa, Alexander was not merely crowned, he was cosmically legitimate, something no Persian king had ever achieved. Soon after his return from Siwa, Alexander left Egypt. He did not remain to govern it personally. His ambitions lay elsewhere. The Persian heartland still lay ahead: Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. But Egypt was not abandoned. Alexander left behind a carefully balanced structure.
Greek administrators oversaw military and financial matters. They ensured loyalty to the wider empire. At the same time, Egyptian priests retained control over temples, land, and ritual life. This division of authority was deliberate. Egypt continued to function according to its ancient logic, but it was now integrated into a broader Hellenistic world. Trade expanded. Greek settlers arrived. New cities were planned along the coast. Egypt was no longer isolated, yet it remained distinct. For a brief moment, this balance held. Alexander died suddenly in Babylon in 323 BC. He was only 32 years old. His death shocked the ancient world, but the greater shock came afterward. Alexander had conquered an empire, but he had not built a system to govern it after his death. There was no clear adult heir, no established line of succession, no agreement among his generals. What followed was confusion. His commanders gathered around his body. They debated, they argued, they delayed. Some spoke of ruling collectively. Others claimed authority through proximity to Alexander. All understood one thing: whoever controlled Alexander's legacy would control the future. Almost immediately, the empire began to break apart. Former companions became rivals. Armies once united turned against each other. The wars of the successors began. But in this struggle, land alone was not enough. Something else mattered more.
In the ancient world, the body of a king was not just a corpse, it was a symbol. It carried memory, authority, continuity. Alexander had been more than a ruler. He had become a living legend. To possess his body was to possess a claim. Plans were made to transport Alexander's remains to Macedonia, to bury him among his ancestors, to anchor his legacy in Greece. But the body never reached its destination. Along the route, it was intercepted, taken south to Egypt. This act was deliberate. It was carried out by Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions. Ptolemy understood something others missed. The empire Alexander created was too vast to rule as a single unit, but Egypt was different. Egypt was wealthy. Egypt was defensible. Egypt was ancient. By bringing Alexander's body to Egypt, Ptolemy achieved several things at once. He associated himself directly with Alexander's authority. He transformed Egypt into the symbolic heart of the former empire, and he elevated his own rule beyond that of a mere governor. Alexander's body was placed in a tomb, later moved, honored. Pilgrims came. Rulers paid respect. In Egypt, the presence of Alexander's body carried immense weight. It was not worship in the modern sense. It was political memory. Through the body, Alexander continued to rule, and Ptolemy ruled with him. Ptolemy had options. He could have fought for control of the entire empire. He could have marched on Macedonia. He could have chased the dream of universal rule. He did not. Instead, he chose Egypt. This decision was not driven by fear. It was driven by calculation. Egypt possessed immense agricultural wealth. Its grain-fed populations far beyond its borders.
Its geography made it defensible. Deserts protected it from invasion. The Nile provided internal unity. Most importantly, Egypt already had a functioning system of governance. By placing himself at the head of that system, Ptolemy did not need to invent authority. He needed only to inhabit it. At first, Ptolemy ruled as a satrap, a governor acting in Alexander's name. But gradually, his position hardened. He assumed royal titles. He adopted Egyptian forms of kingship. He presented himself as pharaoh. This transition was not abrupt. It was careful, measured. Ptolemy understood Egypt's rhythm, and Egypt accepted him. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek by origin, Egyptian in form. The rulers who followed Ptolemy were Macedonian Greeks. They spoke Greek. They governed from Alexandria. Yet in Egypt, they ruled as pharaohs. This dual identity defined their power. The Ptolemies did not attempt to erase Egyptian religion. They embraced it. They funded temples. They restored ancient sanctuaries. They participated in rituals that linked them to the gods. In temple reliefs, Ptolemaic kings appeared performing offerings, wearing traditional crowns, standing before Egyptian deities. This imagery was not decorative, it was functional. Temples were the backbone of Egypt's economy. They owned land, they managed labor, they controlled surplus. By supporting temples, the Ptolemies secured stability. At the same time, Greek culture flourished. Greek became the language of administration. Greek philosophy shaped education. Greek science found patronage. Egypt became the intellectual center of the Hellenistic world. This was not a simple fusion, it was layered. Greek culture dominated the cities. Egyptian tradition structured the countryside.
The two coexisted, and together they sustained the dynasty. The Ptolemaic dynasty was not peaceful. It was, in many ways, violent and unstable. Kings murdered brothers, queens plotted against sons, rivals claimed the throne with foreign armies at their backs. Civil wars erupted again and again. From the outside, the dynasty often appeared fragile, chaotic, on the brink of collapse. But collapse never came. This puzzled ancient observers, and it still puzzles modern historians. The reason lies beneath the surface of politics. While rulers fought, the system endured. The Nile continued its cycles. Fields were planted and harvested. Grain moved along canals and river routes. Most importantly, the temples continued to function. Temple estates were largely insulated from court politics. Priests did not rise or fall with individual kings. They managed land, labor, storage, and redistribution. Even during rebellion, ritual continued. Festivals were held, offerings were made, the gods were honored. This continuity mattered more than any royal decree. In Egypt, legitimacy did not depend on personal virtue. It depended on preservation of order. As long as Ma'ak was maintained, rulers could be replaced without destroying the state. Egypt had learned this lesson long before the Ptolemies. It had survived weak kings. It had survived divided dynasties. It had survived foreign invasions. The Ptolemies did not invent this resilience. They inherited it, and they learned how to use it. At the center of Ptolemaic power stood a new city, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander himself, it was unlike any Egyptian city before it. It was not built around ancient temples. It was built as a Greek metropolis.
Wide streets, harbors open to the Mediterranean, institutions devoted to learning and science. Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria flourished. The library became legendary. Scholars gathered from across the Greek world. Mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, and philosophers found patronage. Knowledge was collected, cataloged, preserved. But Alexandria did not replace Egypt. It sat alongside it. The old religious centers remained active. The countryside remained Egyptian in structure and belief. Alexandria connected Egypt to the wider world. The temples anchored Egypt to its past. This division of roles strengthened the kingdom. Egypt became both ancient and modern at the same time. As Egypt thrived, Rome was rising in the west. At first, Rome was distant, concerned with Italy, then with the western Mediterranean. But as Rome expanded eastward, Egypt came into focus. Rome did not immediately conquer Egypt. It did not need to. Egypt's power lay in grain. The Nile fed cities across the Mediterranean. In times of famine, Egypt meant survival. Roman politicians understood this. Egypt was too valuable to destroy, too dangerous to destabilize. So Rome chose influence over invasion. Roman generals intervened in Ptolemaic disputes. Roman creditors financed royal ambitions. Roman alliances shaped succession. Egypt remained formally independent, but its freedom narrowed. Each internal conflict gave Rome leverage. Each request for support deepens dependence. This was a new kind of power. Not conquest, but control through necessity. By the 1st century BC, Egypt stood at a crossroads. Still wealthy, still ancient, still sacred, but no longer alone.
Egypt had survived by adapting. It had accepted foreign rulers before. It had absorbed new cultures. It had redefined kingship without abandoning tradition. But every system has limits. The balance between Greek rulers and Egyptian structures required constant negotiation. It required rulers who understood both worlds. As Roman influence grew, this balance became harder to maintain. The temple still functioned, the rituals still continued, but decisions increasingly came from outside Egypt. The system that had protected Egypt for centuries was under pressure. What remained was the question of agency. Would Egypt still speak with its own voice, or would it become a silent resource for another empire? The answer would depend on one final ruler. Egypt had never truly vanished. It had changed forms, from pharaonic empire to sacred kingdom to Hellenistic state. Through it all, the Nile endured, the temples endured, the idea of order endured. The Ptolemies ruled not because they were Greek, but because they learned how Egypt worked. They ruled by maintaining continuity. But continuity alone was no longer enough. Rome was watching, waiting. The final chapter of ancient Egypt would not be written by conquest alone. It would be written by choice, intelligence, and resistance. In the next story, we will follow the last ruler who understood this. A queen educated in Greek philosophy, a monarch trained in Egyptian ritual, a politician who challenged Rome itself. Not as a legend, not as a romance, but as what she truly was, the last pharaoh of Egypt.